Hi, I'm Ashley, and 1 year ago I had a breast reduction. Here's my road to reduction. Thanks for joining me on episode 6, Pre-Opportunity. To recap, we had left off with me sharing about my upcoming surgery to all of my friends and family, and in this episode we're going to delve into the pre-appointments that occur on your way to surgery. So, I've previously talked in episode 2 about having a consult appointment with my doctor, which happened late January, early August of 2016, actually. And in that consult, you take measurements, you take photographs, you go through a series of questions about how your breasts are impacting your life, what side effects they're having, what outside treatments you're seeking, in my case physical therapy and chiropractic, and all of that to compile a case to send to the insurance company to see if they'll approve it. So we did all of that, and the doctor also let me ask questions about the surgery. He went over the methods about the surgery, went over the risks, the outcomes. It was a pretty intense first appointment. So your consult should be very open-ended when you're doing this. Your consult should have an opportunity for you to ask questions, for you to hear about different methods, for your doctor to talk about where they believe you should go with this surgery. It should be a lot of back and forth. It shouldn't be very one-sided. I mean, obviously there will be portions that are one-sided because I know nothing about the medical procedures of how to do a breast reduction, but there should be an opportunity for you to provide feedback and questions and comments throughout the whole thing. So once that was done, we sent it off to insurance for approval, which can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks typically. Mine took about 4. So as I was getting my approval, I was starting school. I'm a teacher, and I got my approval, and they were like, okay, let's schedule surgery within the next month. And I was like, this is not gonna work for me. I've just gotten my class, and I need to get settled in. So I actually had a lot of back and forth going on with the doctor's office because when you are approved for a surgery, there's a deadline. You have a start and an end date for that approval, and if you aren't able to do it within that approval span, you have to submit and get reapproved. So my cutoff date was actually not until March, so it's very long, but it was a little nerve-wracking because I had to figure out what time of the school year would be best for me. So I had thought about December, but that didn't work with all the holidays and everything going on and how my school vacations fell, and I finally ended up setting February 1st as my appointment. And that took a ton of back and forth on phone calls because the doctor's only scheduled a couple months in advance. So every time a new month opened up, they'd check in with me or I checked in with them, and I'd be like, I'm waiting for February 1st. So I finally got it scheduled, I want to say November, December-ish of 2016 for February 2017 and ready to go. So when you schedule your surgery, you also have to schedule your pre-op appointment, and that should be 2 to 3 weeks before the surgery, somewhere in that span. And so we scheduled that for January, and we had the surgery all scheduled, so then it was like, hurry up and wait at that point. You know, everything's fallen into place. All I can do is wait. And waiting was frustrating because, as I've talked about before, my medical PTSD had a chance to perseverate and fixate on things, and that whole part of the emotional side of waiting for surgery was very taxing. So the pre-op appointment comes. Mine was about 2.5 weeks before surgery, just of how we could fit it into my teaching schedule to be as unobtrusive as possible. They recommend that you have someone come with you who's going to help you doing the aftercare of surgery, because on the day of surgery you need someone to at least drive you home, and they recommend someone to stay with you for 48 to 72 hours. That's what my doctor recommended. I do want to point out different doctors recommend different things, so I'm just sharing my version, my story, my experience. So my parents were actually going to be the ones who were taking care of me after surgery because I am a single woman on my own. And so my mom came with me because she had the first round of surgery care. She was going to stay with me for a week after surgery because I know I'm a slow healer and I wanted someone there for an extended period of time. So we went in that day, and your pre-op appointment is about going over your restrictions for the next couple weeks, what to expect on surgery day, what to expect for aftercare, what resources you should have. It's a lot of information thrown at you. Thankfully, I had most of my questions about surgery answered during my consultation, but this is also another chance for you to ask new questions that have come up. So I had a few questions about the healing process that we could talk about that day, and then it was a lot of, checking in on measurements again, checking your blood pressure. You had to draw blood and do some iron level tests and all kinds of other things. So it was pretty intensive, and out of the pre-op appointment, the biggest things I took away were med-wise was you can't have any Tylenol or ibuprofen in the 2 weeks leading up to surgery because that increases your bleeding risk. You can't take a multivitamin because that increases your bleeding risk. You have to be very careful with your diet. Things like grapefruit and other things that can provide a lot of vitamin C or a lot of different vitamins that you need to look out for also have to come out of your diet for 2 weeks. I had researched a whole bunch of this, so I had actually cut out a lot of things the whole month before, starting January 1st. Because I just wanted to make sure I was prepared as possible, and that was one way for me to get control of my medical PTSD, was by being on top of everything. So most of my pre-op appointment was completely normal. My blood work comes back fine because they do it right in the office, and, we've got all of our printed off directions. They'll give you a whole packet of information. My mom and I can ask any questions, and the only issue was my blood pressure. So part of my medical PTSD has been white coat syndrome for a good chunk of my life now. And that means anytime I'm in a doctor's office, doctor-related thing, and you put a blood pressure cuff on me, my blood pressure shoots through the ceiling. It's just super high. That day, it wasn't just super high like normal. It was borderline stroke levels. I was so high that they were like, we will be calling your PCP as soon as you leave. And I was like, okay, well, give me time, white coat, this is very nerve-wracking, let's take it again at the end. And she was like, yeah, that's fine, we won't record this first one, we'll record the end one. So we do the whole thing, and I feel a bit calmer, but my blood pressure was still about 190 over, I think it was 120. I mean, it was bad. Absolutely bad. And so at that point, they had to put it in because we were out of time, and they did notify me they'd be calling my PCP and recommend that I call them to see what we could do. And they said that if I showed up for surgery and had those numbers the day of surgery, I would not be able to get surgery. I would be sent home because they were dangerous numbers, which did not help the scenario at all. On top of all of this, she had been chit-chatting with us during the blood work and said that, they start with the most invasive surgeries of the day and then the less invasive ones further on, so they've got the most time in the morning. And near the end of my appointment, she had also let slip that I was the first one of the day at 7 a.m. And so I had that in the back of my mind as this whole appointment was going on. There were a lot of factors. It just wasn't good. So I went home and cried. I won't lie. I completely lost it because I was finally at a point where, this is going to be a reality. I'm ready to be out of pain. I am excited about this surgery. Not, the act of surgery, but I'm excited about the after effects of surgery. And it could all be ripped away. And I was just devastated that was an option. So I called my PCP before they ever had a chance to and scheduled an emergency appointment for a day or two later. I think they couldn't fit me in for a couple of days, if I remember correctly. In the meantime, I saw my therapist and I explained what was going on and how I was going to lose the surgery, and she brought up that although she couldn't prescribe anti-anxiety meds, she felt like that might be a good option for me because it seemed like my anxiety was driving these numbers. So I'm so thankful I had the therapist appointment in between these, because when I went to my PCP, She had the readout from the doctors. They'd faxed it over. I explained what was going on in my head and my brain and medically, PTSD-wise, and all of that stuff. And she agreed that anxiety seemed to be the driving force behind these numbers. Because the numbers I got with her, while still white coat syndrome numbers, were much more normal. They were much closer to like 120 over 100, which was my typical white coat numbers. So she did profess concern that we had an ongoing high blood pressure issue that hadn't been diagnosed because we'd just been dismissive of the white coat numbers for the last few years, which was the reality. I hadn't been taking my blood pressure at home. But we didn't have time to discover and treat that. So she prescribed me an anti-anxiety med called lisinopril. And she prescribed one of the smaller doses. Not quite the smallest, but a small dose. And, told me to get it filled that day and start taking it that day. And then she told me to check my numbers with my blood pressure machine a couple times a day. And if they didn't change in a week, to get back to her. Because we had 2 weeks to deal with everything. So I took it. The numbers were a little lower, but nothing like normal where they should be. So I luckily have an email portal that she and I can communicate with, sent everything off, sent a total acknowledgement of, I think we have a blood pressure issue going on here, but can we try upping the anxiety meds first? And so she was like, definitely, that's the only thing we can do. So we doubled my dose. And so now I'm taking double the dose of lisinopril, and 3 days before surgery, the numbers are still trending lower, but not low. They are not low numbers. They are numbers that I'm not sure will be approved for surgery, because I didn't think to ask what the threshold was. So here I am with all of this on top of me, on top of the medical PTSD, which is also driving all of this. So needless to say, if I hadn't been on these anxiety meds, I would have been a disaster, a complete disaster for these 2 weeks leading up to surgery. So everything kind of worked out in the best, because the anti-anxiety meds took off the worst of the medical PTSD, so I could function for those 2 weeks. But also, they were there because of the PTSD. It was just a big bundle of a mess. So, in most journeys to breast reduction, you're going to have your pre-op appointment, and then you're going to be fine until surgery day, which is your next appointment. I was not that person. Like I've shared with you, my journey was much more muddled. But also, I do want to recommend, even if you're not a medical PTSD person, if you're having a lot of anxiety about this surgery, that is completely normal. This is a major surgery. This is a very invasive surgery. This is not cosmetic, as I've stated before. And it is okay to go to your PCP and say, I am having some extreme anxiety around my surgery, and I would like some anti-anxiety meds just for a couple weeks to make sure that I get to surgery. She was so open to that. My PCP was so open to that. She thought it was a great idea for anyone, not just me and all of my histories. So please talk to your doctor if you're feeling that way as you're approaching surgery. I have actually recommended it to a few friends myself as they've approached surgeries, and your doctor will be willing to provide you with an anti-anxiety med that fits for you for a short period of time to help get you through some of the larger stressors in life. This was definitely an option, and I'm very glad I reached out to it. So once we got through all of the appointments, that was supposed to be one appointment and then cascaded into multiple doctors and multiple appointments, it brings us to surgery day. And I am going to leave that for another episode, because that is intensive. That has a lot to unpack with it, and sorry for kind of leaving you on a cliffhanger, but I just really wanted to go over with, here's what to expect. For such a major surgery, you would think there would be more pre-appointments than there are. Truthfully, most of the appointments you're going to have are going to come post-op, and they're checking in for healing. So once you get your consult and you get scheduled and you have your pre-op, you're done. You're through the beginning phase and you're right in the mix of it. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming and listening to this podcast and Thank you for being a part of my journey and letting me share it. And I also want to point out again that this is a huge surgery for many women out there. This is not some small, easy cosmetic thing. This is not something to be minimized. This is a major surgery. It is a life-changing surgery for me and thousands of other women. And if you are considering this, I encourage you to reach out to your doctors. I encourage you to reach out to your support network. You are welcome to reach out to me at any point. Email is the best way. It's roadtoreductionpodcast@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at roadtoreduction. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Soundcloud, Podbean, iTunes, all named Road to Reduction. I have a WordPress blog, roadtoreductionpodcast.wordpress.com. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, feedback, you're interested in one yourself, you're interested in my story, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to be in contact with anyone who is any part of this journey anywhere. And so thank you for joining me on my road to reduction. Music is Like Music CDK Mix by CDK, copyright 2013. It's licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license.